Thanks for joining us for this webinar. It's going to be on high standards and perfectionism and OCD, how the three of those interconnect, where they do, where they don't, stuff like that. With us, we have Julia Hale, who is the founder, owner, and psychotherapist. She is the founder and owner of Soultality Center for Psychotherapy. Um, and she also has lived experience with postpartum OCD. And we also have with us Paige DeAngelo, who is the founder and CEO of Aer Cosmetics and an NHL dancer for the Philadelphia Flyers. Yes, and Paige also has lived experience with OCD. I'll be kind of moderating here, but I also have experience with OCD. So we're all just really excited to talk to you guys and get into this because it's such an interesting topic. And I know that perfectionism and high standards and being overachievers comes up a lot in many different subtypes of OCD. Um, so we're going to be covering kind of two main areas in this webinar. The first one being, do I really need therapy if I'm successful in so many areas of my life and succeeding, but still living with OCD? And the other one is the question that a lot of people have, which is, what if OCD is the reason I'm successful? And then, yeah, I was wondering, Julia and Paige, if you guys just want to introduce yourselves a little bit based on what I said, and then give a little connection of your own to the topic.
You want to start, Julia?
Sure. As you sort of said, I'm Julia. I'm the owner of Soultality Center for Psychotherapy. We're located in Cambridge, Massachusetts, in the heart of Harvard Square. And so, just by the nature of our practice and location, we tend to work with a lot of high performers, high achievers, and and we also specialize in OCD and anxiety and related disorders. We have a lot of subspecialties around ADHD, trauma, eating disorders, and perinatal issues. I know for myself, I definitely consider myself a high performer, and that often it becomes problematic in my own life. And this is something that I see time and time again. I think just the nature of where our practice is located, we're often getting patients and students coming in for the first time saying, well, this was a strategy. This perfectionism has been a strategy that's been working for me. But now I'm here in this environment surrounded by other high achievers and high performance, and all of a sudden I'm finding it's not working out so well for me, or I'm starting to get behind. So I definitely have a special interest in this area, and um, I think there's a lot of beliefs around OCD, ERP, and perfectionism that can serve as barriers to getting treatment. And I'm hoping just by our discussion today, we can help sort of resolve a few of those so that people feel more heard in their experience and willing to maybe reach out for help.
Awesome. Yeah.
I'll kick it to
Paige?
you.
Yeah. So I grew up in as a competitive dancer, and that was my entire life. Fun fact, I was on the show Dance Moms briefly, and it was a very high intense setting. There's a lot of pressure on the dancers, and there were certain compulsions that I had that I thought were creating the success that I was seeing in dance. But they all lived inside of my head. So there was really no way for someone to kind of check, oh, that doesn't really make sense. What are why are you doing that? And that's kind of how it trickled into all aspects of my life. Being, who super involved in school and extracurricular activities, and these compulsions continuing to see themselves through every area of my life, and then continuing to see success in other areas of my life really fueled the fire for my OCD. And it's something that it's one of my earliest memories is OCD. And so it's something that I've uh, dealt with my entire life. And it wasn't until I got to college that I officially diagnosed and that I realized in my head that my OCD is how I got to where I'm at today. And I was giving it all the credit for the achievements that I've accomplished, especially in starting my business. So I worked with the platform NOCD, I'm an OCD conqueror. It doesn't go away, but I've learned how to conquer and manage it and learned that I have succeeded despite having OCD, not because of my OCD. So I'm happy to share these vulnerable experiences today. I know it's really hard for people to talk about the intrusive thoughts that they have. So bear with me today as I go through this, but I'm going to be as open and honest as possible so that I can help.
Thank you, Paige. Yeah. I feel like a lot of people can relate to what you said about thinking OCD is like the reason for their success, but like you highlighted, at the end of the day, it's not. It's you putting in all the work and stuff. So we'll definitely get deeper into that. I want to kind of segue into a conversation around OCD and the cost of perfectionism, like why it can lead to perfectionism, why there's so much shame and self-doubt. Connected to it. And Julia, I was wondering if you could just give us some clinical insight on that relationship between perfectionism, shame, doubt, and OCD.
Yeah, for sure. And I think I just wanted to start with one obs and of course this is my observation, but what I find is that when you're younger, when you're in school or middle school, high school, it feels like the the barometer for how do I know that I'm doing a good job is pretty black and white, right? You're in this you study for the test, you get the A, right? Like you study a little bit harder, you get into the AP class. Your teachers say, good job, great, accolade, reward, right? And it's almost like the video game, like cha-ching, 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 and you're getting all these external sources of validation that tell you you're doing a good job. And in some ways, right, I think high performers and high achievers suffer because that is how they learn they're doing well, right? There's not as much focus on the internal experience. And then these individuals get to adulthood, whether it's college, grad school, their first job, and all of a sudden they're surrounded by other high performers. They're surrounded by a whole new set of expectations where the external sources of validation become far more nuanced, right? And so there isn't that internal, oh no, I did a good job. I know I did a good job. And what we know about OCD, right? So some of the core features of OCD, for example, we know OCD is driven by the need for certainty. So as it relates to perfectionism, right, uncertainty starts to feel like a liability, right? So perfectionism is about risk management, right? And it becomes a little bit tied up with this moral failing, right? On a moral level, like only a good person would make sure that they're mitigating risk, right? So going into that hyper responsibility piece that we see a lot with OCD, um, the idea of making a mistake appears disproportionately costly to the alternative. And I think the other thing is we're talking about that internal Paige. You even talked about that internal voice, right? And sometimes with OCD, that internal doubt is misread as insight, right? Oh, like my brain is telling me I'm not working hard enough, or that I didn't do as well as this other person, or I'm not where I think I should be. And that doesn't make you feel good, right? Like that triggers shame, um, disgust, guilt, right? And that then drives constant self-monitoring, right? People that have OCD are fantastic problem solvers, right? For the most part, they're very intelligent people, but that part of the brain is kind of goes on overdrive. So there's this constant need to self monitor. And then I think performance ends up replacing self-trust, right? So going back to how it was when you were younger, getting the good grade, that's how I can trust myself. And over time that erodes confidence internally, right? And so that can be, I think, really problematic. And then the other thing too is that errors feel personal, not situational. Um, I've often worked with students, for example, for whom, they don't get the best grade on an exam, but it turns out no one in the class got a good grade. And then they do that kind of weighted of the grades thing. and they do okay because the grade is weighted. But in their mind, it's, well, no, I should have been the one to still get the A, right? They're seeing it as still a personal failing, despite the fact that situationally no one did well, which means that the test wasn't an accurate reflection of the learning, right? So I think that prevent achievement shifts from growth to about prevention, right? Like avoiding fault rather than pursuing values.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you for that insight. It's super helpful. Um, Paige, just kind of going off of that, I wanted to know if you have any examples of how achievement or feeling like you're doing good enough showed up in your life, whether that's within your career, academics, relationships, in any way. If you just have a little bit of a personal, like if you want to add a personal touch to it.
Yeah, absolutely. And honestly, even still, as someone that's going through it, just, hearing Julia talk about similar stories with her patients really just always brings a relief to my mind of what I experienced growing up. And, you kind of just want to give your younger self a hug because I really was the person that was, my life was designed based on, am I a good person? Am I doing the right thing? And I need validation to confirm that. And it truly designed my life. Now, it's hard today because I look back at it and realize and recognize how much, I remember way back, I was probably 6 years old and I was humming a song, and my dance teacher told me, "Oh, you have good musicality." And boom, it stuck to my brain. I have good musicality. That's who I am. I have to pursue that. And now I have to focus on that. And if someone asks me what I do, I have good musicality. And that is how my life, like really up until I was in high school, was evolved. Someone would tell me I'm good at something, someone would tell me that I'm bad at something, and it would sink like so deep within me. Um, I don't know, like a friend coming over and saying there were no good snacks at my house. Like that was like, oh my gosh, my house is like there's so many things. And then from then on, I was like hyper fixated on making sure that I had good snacks in my house. So really it was from the just daily things in life all the way up into like business and success. If my teachers thought it was a good thing that students were practicing outside of school, I would make sure that I was practicing outside of school. Now, at the end of the day, is that a good thing? I mean, it's good that I was practicing, and at least I was putting myself towards something that I enjoyed. The intention behind it was, am I a good person? Am I doing the right thing? And when I get this validation, I will know. If I don't get this validation, I won't know. It's that certainty of, am I doing the right thing? And it's continued into my business. And Julia, you mentioned something that reminds me of my current stance today. So I am a business owner, and OCD has been a huge part of, creating my business, just trying to navigate intuition versus anxiety. Sometimes I feel like I have an intuition or a premonition about something and because I thought it's going to become true. Like one of my customers is going to have a terrible experience with my makeup, or something's going to happen. I'm missing something. And because I have that intuition in my gut, I'm like, oh my gosh, that's real. That's going to happen. Like I thought it, I feel it. And really, it's that anxiety. My OCD would rather know that the worst outcome is going to happen and stick to it and learn how to feel it so that I can be certain on what's going to happen. So that is a few different experiences that I've had throughout dance and growing up, and perfectionism and rewards and dopamine through my OCD.
Yeah.
I
Thank you,
think,
Paige.
and I think,
Oh,
Paige, just to piggyback on that, I always think about the difference between values and the difference between like engaging in a behavior because it's in line with your values versus engaging in a behavior to avoid distress, discomfort, shame, doubt, guilt, right? And the example of you practicing, right? You like on the surface, everybody would say, "Wow, look at Paige, so disciplined, great job," right? And internally, you're thinking, I'm doing this because if I don't, it will mean I'm a lazy, bad person because I'm not following through on this passion that somebody or this skill that someone else pointed out in me.
Mhm.
And so I think really asking yourself, what is the function, what is the utility behind what I'm doing? Is it in line with my values or is it in line with me avoiding some level of discomfort?
Yeah. And kind of going off of that, I wanted to know, Paige, what success like looked for you on the outside versus how you were feeling on the inside. And then Julia, I would love also if you could like put your input in after Paige kind of explains.
Mhm. Yeah, this is a great question. And when I was younger and people would ask, what do you want to be when you grow up? Who do you want to be? And I always knew, and dance was always something that was true to me. It was comforting to me, and it's something that I really loved. I loved how you could like build on the skills yourself. Was it fueled and powered by OCD a lot of the time? Yes. But there's still aspects of it that I do love and enjoy. So I knew that that was part of it. Now, trying to navigate what success looked like to me was something that I was trying to figure out based on other people's opinions and validations. And in sixth grade, when everyone does the science class where you talk about clouds and the weather, everyone, it's a universal experience, at least from my understanding. I really was obsessed with the clouds. I was like, these are so cool. I want to learn more about them. And people started attributing that to me, sending me pictures of clouds. My boss at Rita's Water Ice said, you should be a meteorologist. Boom. That's it. I'm gonna be a meteorologist. Done, signed, sealed, delivered. Someone said I should do it, so it's the right thing to do. So that is kind of how I defined success growing up is someone said you should do it, that's what you should do. And I went to school for meteorology and I started studying weather and sustainability and I was dancing in college and I, was on the right path. And then came the hardest decision of my life when I had to that was dramatic. It really wasn't the hardest decision of my life, but a really hard one when I had to decide that I wanted to pursue my cosmetic company from scratch and build it and leave behind meteorology. And I thought that the world was going to crumble underneath my feet when I told everybody I was not going to be a weather person anymore. It felt like I was disappointing everybody. I felt like I was letting everybody down. And, there were a few people that were like, oh man. And that really hurt, like really, really bad when I would feel that, like, oh, I'm doing the wrong thing. People were also confused about what I was doing. My company was not something that people completely understood, and it didn't seem feasible for just me to do myself. And so the doubt and insecurities that I got when I told people that's what I was pursuing instead were also. So this was a huge turning point in my life where I had to, kind of put aside other people's validations and pursue something for myself. Now, looking back at it, that's what I see success as was that moment when I was able to, as much as it hurt, kind of just put off the shoulder everyone else's opinions and pursue this. And it took years to prove that it was what it is today. And so, yeah, that kind of was how I defined success now is I did something because I was truly passionate about it. I believed in myself and nobody else told me to do it. Nobody else told me that it was the right thing to do. And I just did it because I knew that I wanted to. And so, yeah. And then in terms of dance, it's kind of like there's a ladder, you're in high school, you're in college, you go professional. I dance professionally now, and I don't know if I have as much to attribute to that, but I do feel proud of my accomplishments there. But yeah, that's my story.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Paige. Julia, if you had anything to add to that conversation or any like clinical insights on like why success like feels different, like when you have OCD compared to how Paige was talking about now, she can recognize the actual success more so being in what feeds her values and what makes her feel accomplished as opposed to finding just like that external validation that so many people first look for.
Yeah. And I will just say, I mean, Paige, to me, that sounds like the ultimate exposure, right? I mean, I know we haven't really gotten to the part where we're talking a little bit about ERP and ACT, but right, that was the ultimate exposure for you. And two, even proving that you had to sit, it sounds like you had to sit with a lot of discomfort for a long period of time because there was probably a lot of people in your life that kept saying, what are you doing? And that didn't go away immediately, right? But you kept the course, which I just think is like so admirable and so strong and so brave. I think when it comes to OCD, often people feel like it can be useful because it offers temporary relief from anxiety. And I think going back to my earlier point about when you're younger and you're feeling anxiety about how did I do on this test, and then you get the A, or your teacher pats you on the back, or you're getting an award, or you're getting into the AP class, or you're getting into the Ivy League school, there's some temporary relief, right? It's always temporary. I got into Harvard. That feels great for a while, but now I'm at Harvard and I'm a small fish in a big pond, right? So I think in a way, OCD offers what we know as temporary relief, which a lot of times can feel like control. Right. So I keep living this way and I will be in control. It really disguises itself as responsibility, right? Only a responsible person would listen to these thoughts. If there's any doubt in my mind and I ignore that, and we see this in all types of OCD. I see a lot with like health anxiety, for example. If I have the thought maybe I might have cancer and I don't listen to that thought, right? For a lot of people, that core fear is the fear of regret. What if I have a thought and I don't listen to it? And that thought is right. And I have to live with those consequences and live with that regret forever. And I would also argue that when nothing bad happens, right? So you see a lot of people who continue to climb the executive ladder, to climb in their careers. They get married, they make good money, they have the family. Um, Nothing externally all that bad is happening. OCD takes the credit, right? You've gotten here because you've been following the rules. You've been rigid. You've been double checking. And I would argue that those rules feel safer than uncertainty, even if they're totally exhausting over time, right? Like I don't think OCD ever walks into the room as the villain, right? It walks in as, hey, I've got a solution to this thing, right? This insecurity that you have, I've got a solution for it. But we know over time that reinforces the cycle that you need to engage in all of these behaviors. Otherwise, anxiety is going to keep returning, and when it returns, it's going to be stronger. And the rules always multiply, it's never enough, right? Even if you think about something as concrete as hand washing, nobody starts out washing their hands for 60 times a day. And, it starts with one routine, and that doesn't feel like enough, and it keeps exponentially getting more and more intense. And at the same time, that self-trust arose. I think at the core of so much of the work we do with OCD is learning how to trust yourself, right? A lot of high performers, the only way they learned to trust themselves was through external sources of validation. And when some of that stuff goes away because you're in the real world, OCD jumps in. It's like, I have a great solution for you. And you're like, awesome. And this seems to be working out a little bit for a little bit of time. So you buy into it, right? You make that investment. But over time, that erodes self-confidence. And that's like where the shame and the doubt. And you talk to a lot of these people who on the surface seem like they have it all together. And inside, they're really, really, really suffering, right? Life starts to shrink, right? Because more energy is going into avoiding what might feel uncomfortable, right? Even for Paige, there's another version of your universe or your life, right? Where you could have said, I don't want to feel the discomfort of the doubt, the criticism of making this shift, right? There's two paths, right? And you chose this one, which I think is remarkable.
Thank you. And it's definitely a lot to what you said, in terms of feeling like you need OCD to succeed. That was, I think, the hardest thing when I first started with no CD. That was the thing that procrastinated me into doing so and actually getting help and going through this journey was my superpowers. I thought that OCD
Yeah.
was my superpower, and that if I went on this journey and I let go of my superpower, I was going to be lazy, I was going to be a bad person, I wasn't going to achieve the things that I want to in life, and my superpowers were gone. Like people don't know that I have these magical powers in my head where I can touch the top of my railing 5 times a day, and suddenly I'm in Forbes 30 under 30. No one knows that. But that was my biggest fear going into starting treatment was I'm going to lose the powers that got me where I am today. And that was probably one of the hardest things to let go of. And of course, in business today, there's so many questions, especially being a solo founder, that I don't have anybody to give me that validation. So not knowing is a huge fear of mine. Not knowing if I did this right, not knowing if I did this right. There's a billion different things, in just the world of my everyday work. And nobody can sit with me and just say, no, you're doing this right. Um, I don't know if we're going to have time to talk about ChatGPT at all today, but I do think it has become a little bit dangerous with my OCD personally in terms of like immediate gratification and validation. But I'll leave that aside for now. And yeah, just to your point, Julia, that's how exactly how I felt going into this.
Yeah.
Yeah, and just going off of that, Julia, do you want to kind of dive deeper into this whole myth that OCD drives achievement and that OCD is a superpower and that it's actually helpful for you achieving your goals and kind of talk about why people think that, why they might even feel that at certain points, but ultimately why it is not the cause behind their achievement.
Yeah. I mean, I think a key question for a lot of people, and maybe Paige, you can speak to this in your experience. When you ask someone, like, what is the driving, if we're taking, for example, somebody who um, is a high-powered executive who's spending hours rereading, rechecking emails, reviewing conversation, professional, like, I had a pitch earlier today and the reviewing and going over and when you ask them like what is the driving factor, if you're asking them if you were prevented from doing those things, what is the feared consequence? And I don't think the majority of people will say, well, I won't, like Paige said, I won't end up in Forbes top 30 under 30, or I won't be in the front of like whatever tech magazine. It's usually the discomfort and the anxiety and the distress and the guilt and the shame and all of these things are too much for me to cope with. That usually I think it's all of that stuff is driven by the need to get rid of discomfort, right? I think there's this we conflate like excellence with perfectionism, when I think in a lot of ways perfectionism is not necessarily driven by excellence, but more driven by the need to like avoid the discomfort and the shame and the guilt. So I don't know, Paige, if that felt a little bit like your experience when you were confronted with something like double checking or adding way too much to your plate. Was it, well, I have to end up here? Is it more like, if I don't, I'm going to feel awful?
Yeah, absolutely. Being like a wrong business owner, the wrong fit to be a business owner. And I think it stems a lot also from the doubt that others had. It could have been different if when I told everyone that I was starting my business and I got like an overwhelming wave of like positivity and acceptance, I honestly probably would believe a little bit more that I'm fit for the position, which is unfortunate that I obviously need other people's validation, but it is a part of just the whole need to know. And so having to build that on my own has been a great journey and experience, and I think I've definitely learned a lot from it, and I've learned a lot about myself. Spent the last few years you know, not questioning or focusing on why I'm not fit to be in this position because I don't do these things. Or if I don't do these things, like I have to act like what a business owner would act like. because I'm not. It's always just like I lack, I lack, I lack, I lack, so I have to act, act, act. That is like what my brain has, kind of battled with. And so this journey has been pretty incredible in terms of just figuring out, why do I even care? Why do I care about what I'm doing? Why am I doing it actually? And am I doing it because other people think it's great, or am I doing it because I think it's great and I'm enjoying it? And also knowing that, if you're in the room, usually you deserve to be in the room. And that's something that I've had to tell myself and work through a lot. So that's a little bit of a tangent, but yeah.
And I think another term just we haven't brought up yet is just imposter syndrome. And that I think, especially myself as a small business owner, right? Sometimes at the end of the day, it's, you know, like, am I really fit to be doing this? Do I know what I'm doing? Am I just faking it? Um, and in my experience, the people that have the worst cases of imposter syndrome are actually the people who are like objectively doing well and successful, right? There's a core fear of maybe I'm a fraud, right? Like, and the only way to compensate for that is to work, 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 add more, add more, add more, add more. Please, 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 please. Yes, 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 yes.
Yep. Yes. Never saying no. That's a huge part of my journey as well, is not
Yeah.
saying no.
Because what
And
does it mean to say no? Like, what are the unintended consequences of saying no? What is the moral responsibility in not saying yes?
yeah, yeah, if someone wants to, ask me to do something that I really don't want to do and might be just way too much to add to my plate, the feeling that I would experience saying no is way worse than me doing this thing and shifting around my entire schedule and making something work and draining myself. Just that discomfort of like saying, no, sorry, I don't want to do it is something that I'm really working on, because that still seems like way too incredibly hard for me.
Yeah. And why do you think that feels hard for you, Paige? Like I want you to get a little into, if you're comfortable, about like how it makes you feel to say no to something. Like, do you feel like I'm gonna look like a horrible person? Do you feel like what is your thoughts behind that?
Yeah, this is something that I've been trying to vocalize actually more recently, so I can kind of rationalize it in my head. It's I think something that I experienced growing up was I was always really uncomfortable, and there was so many experiences that I was uncomfortable in, and because I experienced that, the main thing, I did not want anyone else to experience it. If somebody said no to me and it didn't feel good, I don't want anyone else to feel that way. So I'm going to make sure of that. If somebody said something hurtful to me growing up, never want someone to feel that way. So I will make sure of it. So I think it also comes in a little bit of what we could call people pleasing, which goes hand in hand with my OCD personally. And, you know, saying no to somebody if, I don't know, my mom asked me for a favor and it's just like really not something that I can do. Saying no to her, the first things I think about, is this going to make her life more difficult? Is this going to make me seem kind of like ungrateful, rude? I would hate to be rude. I would hate to be an ungrateful person. I would hate to be someone that's negative. So I'm just going to do it. And yeah, I actually had a situation recently at work, in my other, my dance career, and I felt really strongly about something, but telling that person how I felt would cause them discomfort. And the thought of somebody else feeling discomfort is so discomforting to me that I couldn't do it. And I actually just pretended it was totally over my head. And I went home that night and I was really disappointed with myself because I knew how I felt. I wanted to stand up for myself. But the feeling of discomforting someone who was in the wrong was way worse than me just like taking it to the chest and living with it. And it brings us even more discomfort to me. So that's a little bit of how I feel throughout these things. That's a huge, huge part of my life, is like people pleasing and avoiding discomfort at all times.
Yeah. Julia, do you have any like tips or insight on how to deal with feelings like that? Because I think that's so relevant for so many people dealing with OCD.
Yeah, it's interesting because I think on a human level, right? All of us, right? Every single person, we're all grappling with something, right? There's like everyone's got a thing, right? That we're all struggling with throughout the course of our life to some extent. And I think we're all trying to get better at learning how to live with discomfort, whether you have OCD anxiety or you're just an average person, right? As we get older, we're just how do we cope? How do we ride through, right? It's so I just kind of to bring in a little bit of that universal human suffering, right? That no one is alone in this experience. However, the way I like to think about it is that when we say yes, when we really mean no, we're robbing the other person of their willingness to be uncomfortable and cope with discomfort. Right. And I think too, it's like I had a client recently who had gotten invited to like a baby shower and she couldn't go and she was terrified to tell her friend she couldn't go. So much so that, the months went on and she hadn't responded. She couldn't do the response to say, I can't go because she was so afraid of telling her friend, I can't make it. And of course, the longer you let something go like this, the worse it can become. And when she finally broke it to her friend was, of course, disappointed, but her friend said, but I mean, yeah, I'm sad you can't make it, but also I'm okay. Like, I'll be okay. Like, I can cope with discomfort. We have to sometimes learn how to give people the benefit of the doubt, right? We're all trying to get better at this thing, right? So when we say yes, when what we really mean no, we're sometimes robbing the other person of giving them the benefit of the doubt. We're saying, oh, that person can't deal with discomfort. So I'm going to protect them. When on the other side, that person might be like, nah, I'm better at this. This is my skill. Like I'm working on it. Give me the benefit of the doubt, right? And so I think sometimes that's like a helpful reframe. I try to do that with myself. I try to talk about that with my clients that the unintended consequences of actually not giving other people the benefit of the doubt that as much as we're trying to learn how to cope with discomfort and disappointment, other people are too. And we underestimate the ability of others to cope with disappointment. We feel disappointment all the time in life, right? And two things can be true at once. We learn that in ACT therapy. I can be disappointed and also grateful that I have your friendship and perseverant. So I don't know if that's something that feels helpful.
Yeah, that is really helpful right now. Me even ex realizing that. So I appreciate you sharing that, Julia. It's definitely the savior aspect of it, like you said, because our OCD thinks that it's this superpower, it's the savior, it's saving us. We also try to project that control onto other people. I say we, I'm talking about my own experience right now, but I try to project that control onto other people, like you said, and protect them. Like, oh, I do not want her to feel that discomfort. I'm going to actually lie to her and not tell her the truth and not tell my friends that I'm running late because I'm afraid when I'm going to show up late either way. And, those are certain things like telling my friends are like, how far away are you? If it says 15 minutes, like my brain's like, no, you have to say 10. It's going to sound better and it's going to be easier for them to hear 10 than 15. And it's really just creating this whole chaos, and then they're disappointed in me when they say, why didn't you just say you were 15 minutes away? And it's kind of this battle of me thinking, no, I'm gonna, in right now, give them, this safety bubble of like, what is everyone going to be the easiest to like digest? What's going to be the easiest to experience? My OCD can save me, it can save everybody around me as well. And that's been a very dangerous thing in my communication skills with other people as well.
Yeah, like you underestimate others' ability to cope with disappointment.
hmm Yeah, so I'll definitely be taking that advice now and think about it as like you know what, this is actually helping them grow as a person.
Exactly, right? Like you think you're protecting them, but actually you're not even giving them the benefit of the doubt,
hmm
right? Yeah, it sucks you showed up late, but We'll cope. We'll sit
Yeah.
down. We'll start chatting. It's all good.
Yeah, absolutely. So thanks for sharing that.
Yeah, that's actually a big part of my OCD as well is people pleasing. I've never actually thought about it in that lens, Julia. So that like blew my mind right now. It's like, oh my God, wait, I'm actually preventing people from like learning how to deal with things on their own and growing. And also 9 times out of 10, I mean, with OCD, at least for me, I think in like worst case scenarios, we have to remember that the worst case scenario is the worst case scenario. It most probably will not be happening.
Hmm.
Um, so that was very helpful. I want to kind of segue into the world of ERP and treatment and how OCD treatment can really help you redefine what good enough means. So it's not controlled by um, your OCD, so it's more internal. And Julia, I was wondering if you want to just give some information on OCD treatment and how it helps.
Yeah, so the gold standard for treating OCD is exposure and response prevention therapy, which is a type of CBT, though it's really behavioral. Um, And I like to integrate a lot of ACT therapy as well. There's also some other treatments out there that are gaining some attention, like ICBT. But for the purposes of today, I think speaking mostly about ERP and ACT, I think it's important. Like, I just want to put a disclaimer out there, and that a lot of people that I've worked with have often said that they waited a long time to get ERP because what they thought ERP meant was I'm going to be forced to expose myself to situations where I might fail. I'm going to have to hand in a paper that is less than perfect. I'm going to have to send emails with spelling errors. I'm going to have to do all these things that could actually put my career and schooling at risk. And I want to emphasize that I actually, at the end of the day, think that so much of exposure and response prevention is, when it comes to perfectionism, is a lot of it is about the response prevention, about the willingness to do the things that you're already doing in your life, but reducing and eliminating the rituals, compulsions, avoidances, um, rumination, things that you're doing that perpetuate OCD. And so for a lot of and thinking about in terms of exposures, a lot of the times these are just things that people are doing already on a daily basis, right? Life for people that have perfectionism is the exposure. And so we're really talking about just reducing and learning how to act in a way that is consistent with values, right? We can kind of break down, well, how is OCD getting in the way of the life that you want to be living, right? And so a lot of people might say, well, my value is like, I want to be able to go out I want to be able to go out with my friends this weekend. But if there's somebody that is spending all weekend doing compulsions because they're afraid of a piece of their work or product being less than perfect, how can we use that as an exposure? And I also would argue that I think a lot of people come into ERP feeling like the presence of anxiety means that they're not working hard enough, right? If only because initially, earlier on, a lot of the times people experience some temporary relief from compulsions, right? As they start out as solutions, they become problems. So then that anxiety grows and they think, well, I must not be doing enough to manage this, right? Right. And I think so, like as I was saying before, I think ERP can really help separate excellence from OCD driven perfectionism. Um, right. So I once worked with somebody like a highly successful professional rereading emails for hours and hours and hours, worrying that one transgression would really ruin their reputation. So an ERP there is really we're going to write the email, we're going to check it once, and then we're going to send it. And then actually the exposure is not the sending necessarily of the email, but the sitting with the discomfort that arises after and making the active choice to not review the email, ruminate on the email, ask friends for reassurance, replay the interaction. It's let's write the email, let's send it, and let's move on with what you want to be doing in your life. Because the alternative would have been you would have been sitting at home rereading, rereading, rereading. So let's go out for dinner. Let's go meet that friend. I think another part of it is instead of focusing on doing it perfectly so that I can relax. I hear that all the time. I won't be able to relax until I do this perfectly, right? Trying to help people do things well enough, even if they still feel anxious, right? Knowing that over time, from an inhibitory learning standpoint, when we do that enough times, that anxiety is going to start to dismantle a little bit. And I think too, just the added piece about ERP can build in flexibility, right? Knowing, and I talked about this a little bit before, when effort or behavior is aligned with values or when it's simply driven by fear, right? I think Paige, you brought up some examples of, um, and I'm going to do this singing thing, right? Because if I don't, I'm going to feel a lot of guilt and shame about not pursuing something that somebody told me I would be really good at versus having a truly defined value in that area. And sometimes I can get a little murky, right? I mean, there may have been a part of you that did value art and singing. Um, and I think also the last piece is we talked a lot about self-criticism and self-doubt, right? And I think ERP can help a lot with that because distress stops being this evidence of failure, right? So high achieving people will often say to me, I thought successful people didn't feel this way, right? And in reality, ERP shows them that it's like just sometimes it's just part of the experience, right? We learn to kind of better tolerate discomfort and see that it's not we don't have to attach meaning to it either.
Yeah, I have a question for you actually. And it's kind of based off of someone in my own life that is a very high achiever, very professionally successful. And I think they're dealing with like the stigma towards therapy, like especially for OCD, and feeling like, well, does this make me less successful for needing help or asking for help or getting help? And I was just wondering, like, from your experience, what you say to people that are in that mindset or how you kind of help break down that therapy does not equal being unsuccessful.
It's interesting because I think therapy, unfortunately, still has a stigma. And sometimes I look at some of my high performing clients and they are like biohacking and they are going to the gym and they're doing yoga and they're doing meditation retreats and they're doing all of these things to manage their internal experience, their psychological, mental, physical experience. Why is therapy any different?
Yeah, yeah,
Right? It's, you could argue like it's just a form of biohacking your psychological health, right? We're trying to create some new neural pathways in the brain. Um, and I think too, sometimes people have to hit a point where they can acknowledge this is not actually working. Um, Sometimes people will, will have an experience where they'll get married and this event that was supposed to be so amazing and wonderful was hijacked by perfectionism,
yeah,
right? And so sometimes people need to see that these events, these times in lives, whether it's like having kids or this or that, can be hijacked by perfectionism and robbed of you. Um, so I think to this person, I would say, just there are other, you could point out, are there other ways in which this person is taking care of themselves, whether it's their physical health, like nutritionally, this is just like one other tool in your pocket.
yeah, yeah. That's super helpful. Thank you. Um, Julia, or sorry, Paige, I was wondering if you wanted to kind of walk through your journey with getting help for your OCD and like if at first you were nervous, scared, and what led you to actually take that step into getting therapy and just kind of how the experience was for you.
Yeah, absolutely. And I actually wrote down a few notes that I thought of while Julia was speaking, about a few different things she brought up. Now, one actually that I'll bring up first. So, a dissociation. I also, with OCD, have dissociative identity and derealization disorder. So, my coping developed itself. And I think this was another thing that put a pause on me getting help with OCD. And what that is, for anyone unfamiliar, it started around high school. My brain would be so anxious and always feel like I was in fight or flight to the point where it would disconnect from reality. And I literally would feel like someone just like took my head and put it aside and I was floating. That's what I would always say. I feel like I'm floating. Um, and you're just like really out of, I could be like super upset or super anxious and I'm feeling all these emotions. I'm feeling it. It's really, really heightened. And then it just goes to zero. I don't feel anything at all. I can't really come up with like words or describe how I'm feeling. And it's a coping mechanism that my brain just took upon itself. And it said, you know what? We're gonna, do this because nothing else is working. So dissociation is something that is like carried with me a lot through my journey. It got like to a point where my dissociation was just really driving, the vehicle of my mind. And that turning point is what led me to believe that or understand that my OCD was actually causing this. So this is kind of where I got help. And it was this huge, big turning point in my life. And there's a few different aspects of my life, right? I was just getting into a relationship. And relationship OCD I have a ton of experience with that. I just starting my business. So I had all these times in my life where things were changing and I was choosing things for myself that other people weren't necessarily approving 100% of. The dissociation became so bad. And to the point where I think I was driving at one point and I was just so dissociated, I had to figure out how to pull over because there was no way I should have been driving a vehicle. After that, I had to be a lot more honest with my family and friends about yeah, that just happens. And they were like, what do you mean that just happens? What's going on? They had no idea. The shock of people when I explained how much was going on in my head, nobody knew. I talked to my one friend and she was like, you just have it all so put together. Like I wish I could be like as disciplined as you. And I told her, I was like, I have no idea what's going on ever. I don't know what's going on in work. I'm just trying my best every single day that I show up. And she was just like shocked. Like you would never think that. Anyways, kind of trailing off, but this is getting to the story of finally where I started to get help. When I saw actually just an Instagram ad for an OCD. I don't know if I was, looking up OCD or talking about it or videos of people with OCD came up and different OCDs that I experienced, the certain ones that are just so like kind of just repulsive in your head that you don't even want to like talk about them or bring them up. I had experienced them since I was in sixth grade. And I remember sixth grade when it started happening, these like intrusive thoughts about just like randomly, I'll be honest, like randomly going up and kissing a stranger or something and then being like, oh my God, why did I do that? I never did it. But that's what my brain would go to. And I never told anybody. And actually, that's the first time I've ever said that out loud. So I've never told anybody that because it was gross. And people would look at me and say, like, you're weird for thinking that. And then I saw an Instagram video from someone with no CD that said that they experienced the same thing. And I just sobbed. I was like, oh my gosh. I knew it was like OCD, but I didn't know that was part of OCD. And then I just started learning more about the differences of it. So I signed up for an OCD and I had my first session. And my first session was honestly just to look around my room and find something that's wrong. I rushed onto the session. I was running from something else. And there was a bag of cat food that I didn't get to put away. And I was just really it was sitting in the back of my head that that cat food was sitting on the floor where it's not supposed to be. And my therapist said, what's bothering you in your surroundings? So we looked at the cat litter bag, and I think for 45 minutes I stared at the cat litter bag and just cried for 45 minutes straight. And that was my first day um, of ERP treatment, and it really was difficult. There was so many different layers of my OCD every single week that we worked through, and I looked back a month into it, and I said, I don't you know, I'm not tapping the ground as much. I can walk without noticing patterns on the street that my feet have to follow. And the second that I saw progress, I just dove into it and was like, please set me free. Get me out of here. Let's just go all the way for it. And I just kept going. It was a snowball effect, but I was really terrified at first. It was. That was a lot. I don't know how, concise that was, but I'm happy to clarify or go anywhere that we need to go from there.
No, I think that was amazing, honestly. You did an amazing job explaining it. I was wondering, Paige, you mentioned how it can be scary and difficult, and that's true. Yeah, ERP therapy can be hard, and especially if you haven't done anything like it before, at first it can be very scary. But what would you say to somebody who maybe was like in a similar situation to you, where, they're really struggling but they're afraid to take that first step? Like, would you explain like how it's worth it, or like just kind of why it's important to still take that step?
Yeah, I get emotional thinking about it because I realized during the process, the day that I started was kind of the day that I took my life back. And the longer that I put it off, the more life that I was giving away to my OCD. So once I started and I realized, how much more, and I hate to use the word control because that's kind of where OCD all stems from, but really like, taking back control of my own life. I'm just so grateful that I started when I did and that I have all this time now to kind of go through life with these coping mechanisms. I'm so grateful. I'm feeling more. I'm experiencing more. I'm learning how to live with dissociation, and I need that coping tool less because these thoughts and these intrusive thoughts and compulsions and ruminations don't take up as much of me as they once did. So I would tell somebody, think about all the time that you're going to get back if you start now. And that to me made it seem like so worth it. Oh my gosh, look at all the time that I've spent. I look back at my college years and I just remember kind of giving it all to OCD. And it's affecting my relationships, affecting my career, affecting just my life as a whole. And that there's this beautiful, beautiful other side waiting for me. Like I'm starting today, getting on the journey. It doesn't matter how hard it is because the reward from it and just like the other side of life that you get to experience is so beautiful and so incredible. I'm just so happy that I get to like feel emotions again. And I get to be sad and angry and anxious and happy and like actually experience it without feeling guilty or ashamed. It's just a huge relief. I think life has just gotten tremendously better. So as scary as it is, day one, just try to get to day four. If you get to day four, look back at day one and see, the progress that you've made. And it's not linear, but you'll definitely see it.
Yeah.
And I also just wanted to point out because a lot of people that are perfectionists, high performers with OCD, like on the outside, objectively speaking, they're doing great, right? Or the people around them are, how could you possibly have OCD? Or how, like, what are you talking about? You're doing great. Um, but inside, the experience is different. And I think it's important to think about the meaningful periods of your life, like because some people might say, well, I'm not checking the doors, I'm not rereading emails, I'm not this or that. But are there experiences in your life where you're not fully present for, And I think back to my postpartum experience with OCD, I was on this, like, I was not depressed on the surface. I think I looked great, as I walk in my baby every day. But the truth is, I was constantly consumed with thoughts about her safety and fire safety. And I don't actually have any memories of truly enjoying just being and connecting with her in during once months 3 through 12. And I feel that that feels like, there's a lot of grief around that. So I think I would say to people, because a lot of people might say, well, how do I know if I need, isn't it only when things get really bad, right? Or if I'm in trouble at work or I end up feeling something. And I would say, you could be doing great. But if you are out apple picking with your kids and you're up here the whole time ruminating about an email that you sent to your boss, is that how you want to show up in the world? And I think that's also like a good point to think about getting help because it doesn't have to be something that is visible externally.
Yeah, yeah. I remember my sister was getting married and I was, going through treatment and going through this and one of my goals was I just want to be there. I want to be there. I go so many places and I'm not there. And I just wanted to be at my sister's wedding. I just wanted to experience it. I didn't want, somebody else being there. I just wanted it to be Paige and enjoy it. And that's been a huge driving factor of me getting help as well. I think about my own future wedding and my own future kids. And, I just want to be there.
Yeah. Thank you both so much for sharing. Um, those answers were super helpful, and it was really nice to have like both lived experience answers and then the clinical answers. So thank you both so much for that. We're gonna shift towards the Q&A portion of this. So how this is gonna work is we have the Q&A feature on Zoom, which I see a lot of you guys sent in questions. I'm going to read out the questions and then direct them to either Paige or Julia, and then they will answer them. So the first question I have is for Paige, and it says, so Paige, how is your relationship with OCD now?
My relationship with OCD now is it feels like a lot smaller. OCD feels a lot smaller in my life. I still experience, especially around the things that I love. When you love something really deeply, OCD loves to, you know, love it more. And so in my relationship, with my business, the things that I love, it really loves to send in intrusive thoughts like me waking up and first of is, oh my God, my boyfriend's dead and my and call me and tell me, and I don't know how he's going to be able to do that. That's actually the first thing I thought when I woke up today, genuinely. And then just sitting, and my therapist would say, and what if? Take a deep breath and say, and what if? Because the other side of things, me battling that and saying, there's no way. Technically, there is a way. It's the uncomfort of that happening that I have to sit in, the uncomfort and discomfort and the anxiety, just sitting in that feeling. And what if? If that happens, we'll deal with it and we'll go from there. So not like being so certain, like, well, that's not going to happen. That didn't happen today. Anyways, those are some certain things, but it's definitely a lot better. And I have the tools to cope with. I've been a lot more honest with my peers and friends and families about it, so I can tell them how I feel, and they also know not to like I don't know where I was going with that, but just being honest about it has been a lot more helpful to rationalize it in my head. So yeah, I feel a lot better with it, but it's still there.
Thank you, Paige. The next question is for Julia. It says, I'm hoping to start OCD therapy soon, and I feel like I have to come prepared about my OCD to get the questions right or something like it's a test. Is this common? Is there any preparation I actually have to do? Any suggestions?
I feel like that's a super common concern. I mean, for people that have OCD, there's always the, do I really have OCD? How do I know? Am I just lying about this? Right? Like the uncertainty of, is this actually OCD? And I need to be 100% certain that it's OCD before I'm seeking treatment. Otherwise, I'm hyper responsibility, wasting someone's time. And so I think sometimes people that have OCD have this like this urge to be overly inclusive with information. I have to come 100% prepared. I have to have all the answers. I have to explain everything in order to be fully understood, because if not fully understood, they won't be able to help me. And I'll just say that that's not true 99% of the time. And I think that in terms of OCD, and like so many people that we work with, they just come in and sometimes they don't even know that they have OCD, but something on our website, I think, speaks to them and their tendencies, and then they realize that they have it. I think the main thing that we want is for somebody to come in and say, "Hey, I think this is maybe something that's going on in my life. I don't have all the information, but I'm at the point where I want to get help." Right. And so in terms of getting the questions right, this is something that your provider will help you with, right? The provider is going to offer a phase that is called an intake and assessment phase, where they're going to go through with you what OCD shows up like in your life, what it looks like, doing a functional analysis, and then they're going to help you come up with a treatment plan. But truly, you could just come to therapy and say, I think I have OCD and I don't know what to do and I need help. And that is sufficient.
Awesome. Thank you. Next question is for Paige. It says, how long did it take after your first therapy session to feel a sense of relief and hope?
Well, there was the first time that I really realized that a lot of my compulsions were gone, and there are actually parts of OCD that have been completely gone since going through help. Such as I used to touch the top of a banister every time I walked down the stairs, and if I didn't do that, someone was going to die or something bad was going to happen. That is gone. The NOCD treatment like really helped with that, and I have not had to touch a banister or like do anything for an action or for a cause since treatment. So I did want to mention that as well. I don't know if I could put like an exact timeline on it. I think I was in treatment probably for maybe like 8 months. I want to say maybe a year before I graduated. So to get to OCD consuming my entire life to me walking with OCD is like, you know, an aside thought. Yeah, it probably took around like 8 months to a year, but after the first session, I knew that I was on the right path. So the first session really is what brought me like, whoa, this is real. This is why I'm doing the things that I'm doing, and I don't have to be, let's get this started. So there was a relief on the first day as well.
Awesome. Thank you. Um, Let me see. Okay, so this one will be for Julia. It says, what if the problem is your values, that you can't make any choices that oppose them, even when those decisions make life so much harder?
What if the problem is your values, that you can't make any choices that oppose them, even when those, I mean, I think, is this a question of if my value is success? Um, is this probably what we're thinking about?
I think so.
Yeah, I mean, I think sometimes, like, I integrate a lot of ACT and values work into OCD, but as we know, sometimes OCD can latch on to values. Like, what is a value? And I think sometimes values can get a little bit sticky of what is my value success, right? Which I would argue is not really a value, as it's a goal, right? And so maybe to take a closer look at what values are. Um, and I think, yeah, you can totally get caught in, I think, what some people call the two-tailed spike, damned if I do, damned if I don't, right? If I do this, is it in line with my value? And if I don't do this, then it's in opposition to my value, right? And so I think even in this case, I might say take a step away from the values if you're getting stuck to values. It sounds like these values are getting a little bit too sticky for this person. I think with a little with a little more context, it might be an easier question to answer. Um, but I think sometimes we have to leave things up to chance, right? When people get caught in what I called that two-tailed spike, sometimes it's just making a decision and being willing to live with the consequence that it might be against your value. Like, right, that's sometimes just the exposure, right? Is this against my value? If I do this, is it in line with my value, but it's against another value, right? And so sometimes making the decision, taking the action is exposure itself, and then being willing to live with the consequence that this might be in line with my values or it might not. I don't know if that makes sense.
I think it does. Yeah, thank you. Um, Okay. This question, I'm going to have both of you answer it. We can start with Paige and then we can go to Julia. So it says, how do you handle external praise from people close to you about being perfect? People tell me that they don't worry about me, I never make mistakes, etc., which then fills my mind with all the mistakes I've ever made in my life and feeling lots of shame and guilt. I end up ruminating on those past memories and beat myself up a lot.
Yes, this is a really tough one. I will be honest. One thing that I always say to people when people, let's say I haven't seen someone in a while, but they follow me on social media, they'll come up to me and say, "Oh my gosh, you're doing amazing, you're crushing it." And I just always say, I only post the highlights, you know? I only post the highlights. And I don't know if that's helping me feel, show them that like there is another side of me or being real and honest. Of course, you can accept the praise because, you are great, I'm sure, at what you're doing, and you do deserve the praise, and that is something, but accepting it as okay, here I am. Accepting it as that's their perception of you. You know your truth, you know your values, and can celebrate when you're doing things well. You can celebrate, when you're working through hard times and staying true to yourself, not letting someone else's perception of you determine your truth. So if someone tells you you're doing great, not letting that be like, okay, I am doing great. Now I have to uphold to this value. If someone tells you you're doing bad, okay, I am doing bad and my life is ruined and everyone's going to hate me. Letting that be its own bubble. Someone is perceiving you from their perspective. That is not the end all be all truth. What do you believe? What are your values? How are you working through things? That is your truth. That is all you know, that is all you know to be true. So that's kind of how I deal with it. Like, even if someone thinks I'm doing great or if someone thinks I'm doing not great, that's their perception. I'm going to, create my own system and scale to determine that. And as long as I feel good in what I'm doing, then I'll determine that as great. But yeah, sometimes I'll just say, I only post the highlights to people.
Yeah, thank you, Paige. Julia, do you have anything you want to say to this question?
It's interesting. I work with a lot of people that have OCD and an eating disorder as well. And I feel like this is something that often comes up for people who'll say, who's struggling with an eating disorder, and they get all this external, "Hey, you look great. Oh my gosh, you've lost weight. You look fantastic. You work all the time. You eat so healthy." Right. And then that triggers them to start thinking about, oh, well, shit, excuse my language, I missed a workout last week, or I actually wasn't eating healthy the other day. And those are things that the people should actually be working on. But when you hear praise like that, it can be really harmful because then it's a reminder of, well, I have to uphold this image that everybody has of me. And here are these examples where I'm not upholding it. And so it can actually be counterproductive to recovery. And I think obviously with an eating disorder, there's like a slightly different response that I encourage people just to say, please don't comment on my body, my food. But I think as Paige had a great response, which is just you're seeing a highlight reel.
Yeah, thank you. Um, okay, let's see. We'll answer this one. This one is more just like commenting towards it. Julia, if you wouldn't mind commenting towards it. But this person said, I used to think OCD was the reason for me being a great and detail-oriented UX designer. Now that I'm in my 40s, my brain is almost always tired and foggy, which I now know is from my OCD that I never knew I had until now. So, do you just have any just like thoughts on that?
Yeah, I feel like Corey's the poster child for a lot of the clients that we see. Obviously, just like in Boston, we are inundated with software engineers. So his or her, sorry, I know Corey can be either. Experience is one that feels very familiar to me. And I think something that I commented on earlier, which was when externally things seem to be going great. This individual is a great UX designer, right? On the outside, they've become successful. The observation from others may be that they don't have OCD. They don't see them compulsing all day long. I'm getting the sense that the rumination, the mental compulsions, the sort of merry-go-round, the treadmill that this person is on in their life is the main compulsion. And over time, I imagine this as a person that's showing up to life events that they want to be present for, and they're not because they're up here, right? Like Paige, example of I want to go to my sister's wedding. I'm like, I just want to be there. I don't want to be in a tug of war with my OCD the entire time. And so for this person, I would say, like, I think that's a perfect time to reach out for help if they haven't already. Because I think of multiple mental compulsions as sort of solving a math problem, right? A complex one, right? It's easy. 1 plus 1 is 2. That's easy. But if I were to say, like, what is 542 times 365? If you were constantly trying to solve problems like that in your head all day long, like your brain would be fried. There would not be a whole lot of room for joy and connection and community. So, I absolutely think that's a sign, that this is probably OCD and this is a good time to maybe reach out for some support.
Yeah, thank you. Um, the next question. I'll have both of you answer this as well, starting with Paige. But it says, if I feel as if my perfectionist, people-pleasing 14-year-old daughter, who's also a dancer like Paige, might be flirting with the edges of OCD. She doesn't open up well to others, and I don't know how useful therapy would be for someone like her. Do you have any advice? So Paige, I was just wondering if, like from your experience of being a dancer and seeing OCD kind of early on, you have just like any advice or thoughts for this person.
Yeah, it's tough. I wish I knew more, but at that age, nothing was more powerful than my OCD. My dad acknowledged when I was younger that I was tapping the top of the banister every day when I left, and that like if I didn't do it right, I'd have to go back upstairs and do it again. And there were things that he noticed. All he really said was, you don't have to do that. You're gonna drive yourself crazy if you keep doing that. And it kind of just that was like not even close to impactful enough for me to really sit with it and be like, whoa, okay, like this doesn't actually have any power. Especially going through, like puberty and being in that age where your anxiety is already so heightened, having the sense of control is like the savior. It is like, if I don't have this, I will absolutely crumble to the ground. Now, what would have helped maybe is knowing what OCD is. I'm sure my family didn't wasn't really too aware of it either at the time. But knowing what it is, knowing like what the symptoms are, even in just like casual conversations. Again, the really scary thoughts. I think when I was younger, that's when they started. Knowing that I was not alone in that. I don't know how you could position it to get, and maybe Julie can, be more help on how to do this. But yeah, if I just knew what it was, and that other people experienced it, I probably would have been willing to hear other people out and let go just a little bit.
Even just this individual's daughter hearing Paige's story, I think sometimes it's more helpful rather than saying, hey, you're going to go into the room of this professional therapist that's like, you know, there's a power dynamic, there's just sort of authority, right? Rather than, hey, here's someone that's been through what you're going through. Like, have a chat with them, listen to a podcast, listen to something that they've shared on their story. I do know too in the OCD community, I actually have a colleague that used to work for the Boston, she was a therapist for like the Boston Ballet Company. So there's also a chance that if you do a little research and due diligence, you might be able to find somebody who actually has specific experiences working with dancers as well, because I think that is it's a whole subset of like issues and um that just might help her be more open. But I certainly think just hearing the experiences of other people, peers, people that might be going through similar experiences might help her.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
absolutely.
All right. This question, it's a long one, so let me read it and then I think it is for Julia, but we can have both of you answer it if it requires that. All right. It says, I think the biggest challenge for me was that I got used to the rewards for being successful at school, like Julia mentioned, and then as I entered the work world, it feels like success became a lot more nebulous and based on relationships than outright effort. It wasn't as simple as I try hard and I get success. This seemed to collapse something in my belief system and prove to me that all my efforts didn't even matter. The loudest person would get the promotion. Do you see any of this with other former high performers? And how do I gain that satisfaction back without the external rewards?
Oh, my heart goes out to this person, right? Like I just really feel their pain and their struggle to also feel like I've been hoodwinked by OCD for a long time. And I think it's important to point out that a lot of the times OCD is it's a liar. It's like casting a spell on you, making you believe one thing and then it's the other. And I think this is the challenge that I mentioned earlier, where for a long period of life, it can be very black and white. You work hard, you get the reward, and all of a sudden you get out into the real world and things are like far more nuanced. And man or woman, hours doesn't necessarily always equate to success. And so I think for to me, right, is there a solution to all of a sudden helping you get back to this place of feeling like you're performing well when the rules have been rewritten? I don't know, but this is where I know that there's a lot of room for work around self-compassion and building that internal sense of confidence and self-trust, right? At the core of OCD treatment is learning how to trust yourself again. And it sounds like for this person, their internal trust has really been eroded. This thing that I thought worked, I thought I found the superpower, as Paige calls it. And then all of a sudden it turns out it's not a superpower anymore. And I don't trust myself enough to know that I'm doing a good job. Right. So I would really think a lot about and yes, I do see a lot of this with other former high performers. And I think the way to gain satisfaction back without the external rewards would be something that's internal, working on self-compassion, working on learning how to trust yourself, right? Trying different things. Some of it is exposure and then learning, right? We talk about inhibitory learning something new, right? Oh, I'm not the loudest person in the room, and maybe I didn't get the promotion, but maybe something else great did happen. And can I take some time to focus on that and learn from that?
Yeah, thank you.
I just have like one really quick thing to add to that. When I realized that a lot of my life, was attributed to my OCD, it I questioned everything and I felt like everything was a lie. Like I was doing everything, like everything was fake and fraudulent. That's how I felt immediately. I felt betrayed by myself. And I couldn't even like sit with the fact that, I was a business owner and a dancer and like these things just felt like lies and they felt ingenuine. And so it was really hard for me to like differentiate like what parts of those were like fueled by OCD and like what do I actually love about them. And like I can love dance and appreciate it with also acknowledging that a lot of it, had to do with my OCD. But even though it feels like overwhelmingly like everything's been a lie, that's exactly how I felt. Even my relationship, I was just like so blindsided. That's what I've been working on is like putting pieces back into finding out like what I love, why I love it. Journaling has been a huge help. Like every day I write down like what felt good today. It could literally just be me making like coffee. Like, what could I prioritize? I do yoga, and like that's just something that I do because I like it on my own. And like finding those things, like Julia said, that you like and they feel good because of you, and nobody else really has any external opinions on it. That's what's helped me like rebuild the trust with myself.
Yeah, thank you. I feel like, did you have anything to add, Julia? Or sorry.
No, I mean, we're t just talking about, right,
Yeah.
like the breaking apart the relationship between excellence and values, right?
Yeah.
Doing
Yeah.
things because they're in line with your values, not necessarily because it's going to bring some level of excellence.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, I think that's a great place to leave it off. We're kind of out of time now. But I just wanted to thank all of you for joining us today. I feel like this was a super productive conversation. It was definitely eye-opening for me as well, so I really appreciate that. Just as a reminder, this will be recorded and sent out to you guys later next week if you attended. And then also, I just want to let you know that there's going to be a link in the chat for booking a free 15-minute call with our member advocates, kind of the first step for getting started on your OCD treatment journey. Even if you just want to ask questions, just kind of explore what it would be like, they're there for you. Um, and yeah, highly recommend it if you're ready to take that step. So thank you all so much, and we will see you at our next webinar.
Thank you
Thank
so
you
much for
all.
having us.
Yes, thanks for having us.